so I can sculpt myself into any aspect immediately, get a title for it, make it a little worse, make it a little better, change the title, and begin to contaminate the pattern by virtue of using this particular technique. Yes, sir?
Why do you call this assessment as opposed to therapy?
At that point, why am I calling it assessment rather than therapy? You're absolutely right. I think that we blur the line, and that assessment is intervention, and intervention is assessment, and it just, moves very fluidly. The essence there is like a little lesson from Erickson. Erickson would say to his students, do hypnosis in the first half of the session, discuss it in the second half. And so that was so the opposite of what hypnotists were saying, because the hypnotist would meet with the person, talk with the person, how has your week been? Oh, we've only got 25 minutes left, let's do the hypnosis. So the idea would be to create the experience first and then talk about it afterwards. And I think of this as an assessment issue because I do it so quickly, and it becomes my way of assessing and understanding what is this person's experiential reality. So I am involved in assessment, but it is intervention at the same time. So because it comes so early in the session, to me it's an assessment technique. But so it wouldn't matter how you categorize it, what matters is the outcome. And if the outcome is that the person gets therapy, and if the outcome is that you get information,
Well, that was the point.
yeah. Okay, so now, there were 5 pieces here that we were going to go to, and none of those 5 pieces are going to happen perfectly well, but let's do this one because this is like a skeleton key intervention, because I can't get to everything that I had on my list. But this would be something that you could just do, and you could do it mentally with me as I am showing you the slides. So the frame for this would be, I'm going to give you a sentence stem, and I want you to answer this sentence stem, complete the sentence stem only in the affirmative. So even if you have any objections, suspend those objections, only fill in this sentence stem in the affirmative. And the sentence stem is, how do you know that you can change this addiction? How do you know that you can change this habit? How do you know? And so then think of 5 answers. How do you know that you can change this habit? And I think that what you will find is that if you ask the person this question, you will initially get what I would call level 1 answers. And they will give you these level 1 answers in terms of motivation. I know because I have to, I know because I want to, I know because it's the right thing to do. And more often than not, when you ask the question, you will get both level 1 and level 2 answers from people. And sometimes I will help the person structure these things. So I become their secretary in structuring. So level 2 answers would be facts, things that you know in the world. I know that I can do this because other people have done it. I know I can do this because there's a technology that exists. I know I can do this because there are books about how to do this, and I can read those books. I know that I can do this because I have your help. So then you have one list, and this is like The Little Prince. In the book The Little Prince by Saint-Exupéry, right? You know the book? Well, the Little Prince, whenever he asks a question, he continues to ask the question over and over again until he gets an answer that he can really understand. So this is meant to be asked a number of times. How do you know? How else do you know? How else do you know? And then you're helping the person to organize their motivations, And you can help them to organize the facts that they know in the world. Then, sometimes spontaneously, but sometimes with a little prodding, we would go to what I would call level 3. I know that I can be normal about eating, or stay away from alcohol, or stop smoking, whatever it is. I know that I can because I am. And level 3 would be a level of personal strengths and skills, personal resources. Yes?
Sorry, is this on the
Not website, no. I hadn't made this into a handout, but I would be very glad if you pass around a sheet and everybody writes down in block letters their email address. I will be glad to send this handout to you. So if somebody could start that, I would be, you want to start that, please? You have a piece of paper, put your email address in very clear block letters, and okay, we have 2 lists, one on this side, one on this side. Okay, so I know that I can accomplish being a non-smoker because I am trustworthy, loyal, helpful, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, friendly, and reverent. Right? So whatever the qualities are, you're helping the person to organize on level 3, which is the level of personal strengths. Then, sometimes spontaneously, but more often than not with a little prodding, we go to level 4. Level 4 is, I know that I can accomplish this because I've done difficult things before, including I got my degree, I moved to a foreign country, whatever it is, I climbed a mountain, whatever it is that this person has done, you're helping them to organize their historical resources. And then if you push this one step further, level 5, I know that I can accomplish this because I have access to these situations, friends, contexts. So this is organizing social resources. So the way that you would look at this in its totality, I know that I can accomplish because motivations, facts, personal strengths, personal history, historical resources, social resources. And once you've gone through this and you have 5 things in each area, you've done motivational interviewing. But to me, it's not like motivational interviewing. To me, it's more like organizing your resources. This Ericksonian approach is resource elicitation. And eliciting resources is what experientially eliciting resources, this is more cognitively, but eliciting resources is one of the things that we consider to be at the essence of Ericksonian therapy. People are not in touch with the resources that they have. And when they are out of touch, our job is to help them connect with the resources that they have that are dormant. Herman?
Where would you classify the type of answer you're likely to get from most addicts, specifically cigarette smokers and several others, that I know I can because I have?
Because I have.
So I quit before, therefore I know I can.
Yeah. Well, how do you know that you can? So then the question, I know I have because I can because I have. This is great. Well, I know that I can, stop using heroin because I stopped biting my nails when I was a kid. So whatever it is, whatever they get in touch with, we're building on those resources. Maybe then the follow-up question is, how do you know that you can permanently be a non-smoker, a non-addict? I know that I can because, and have, and then build on that. 1, 2.
Sorry,
What point on the therapy?
Yeah, what is the, like,
First session.
a lot of the time,
First session.
they're not hearing anything you're saying, so to reproduce an answer like that.
No, you know, with non-smoking, with helping people to stop smoking, which I do all the time because it's hypnosis and that's such a call. It's very infrequently that, you know, a couple of weeks go by that I don't see somebody who wants to stop smoking. And so I would say probably 50% of the time when I'm working with people who want to stop smoking, I do this in the first session, and I don't take more than 10 minutes to do it. And I'm organizing the resources, and I'm getting them down, and I'm helping them to connect with their resources. And if you think about it just in the most benign way, like just a kind of gross example, hypothetical, not dealing with addiction. Person comes in and says, Dr. Zeig, you've got to help me. I say, well, what? The person says, I got terrible anxiety. I say, well, please tell me about it. The person says, well, every time that I get into an airplane, I've got this terrible, debilitating anxiety. Well, what's it like? Well, I start to sweat, I have palpitations, my hands tremble, I'm afraid that I'm going to go crazy, I can't get into an airplane. I say, well, what's your occupation? The person says, well, I'm a public speaker. I've got to get into an airplane to be able to lecture. And I speak to thousands of people, I motivate people, I can't get into an airplane. Next person comes to see me, I say, well, what's the problem? The person says, Dr. Zeig, you've got to help me. I say, well, please tell me, what's the problem? The person says, every time I get up in front of an audience, I can't stand it. I'm afraid that I'm going to go crazy. I have palpitations. I start to shake. I can't get in front of an audience. I say, well, please tell me, what's your occupation? The person says, that's the problem. I'm a test pilot. I fly planes vertically. I fly them horizontally. I fly them inverted. I've got to go in front of an audience. I've got to tell them about my findings. I can't do it. Now, each one of these people, in one context, they're incredible. But in this other context, they act like they have no resources, that they're dissociated from this whole history that they have. And some misengineering of human behavior that makes it possible for us to be psychotherapists, you can't say to the person, excuse me, Mr. Pilot, but if you can relax doing 2 Gs in a 60-degree bank, please bring that relaxation with you when you're in front of an audience. You should be able to say that. But somehow you can't connect people directly to that resource. So one thing to do is to build the resource state, get the person in touch with the resources until they spontaneously start to move into that state because they have those resources within them. So this is a way that I conceptualize the job of psychotherapy. It's a little bit like recycling resources, helping people to reconnect with the resources that exist.
Dr. Zeig, I think the question comes from, you keep referring to someone who calls you and says, I want to stop smoking.
Yeah.
The central problem,
Right.
the central problem in treating addiction is that the person with the problem doesn't know they have it, doesn't believe they have it.
Yeah.
People don't come to me and say, I want to stop drinking. That's not what the conversation is about. It's my girlfriend wants to stop drinking, or I've got 2 DUIs.
Right.
See? And one of the things that's interesting, I really love this idea of building resources, and I'm going to use it, I keep using it. But the problem that you have before you get to this point is the problem that what most addicts are doing in the category I'm describing are, they're answering a question. The question they're answering is, how do I know I don't have a problem?
Right.
So they are taking evidence of a problem in the same way that we're doing in Iraq right now, frankly, and transforming it into evidence of success, evidence of control. So there's something that I can't get my head around about building the resources of what you can do, when what this person really needs to find out is that there's certain things they can't do.
Yeah.
Certain things they can't do. And it's that learning that they haven't yet had, that we have to create that experience with the person.
Couldn't agree more. A problem is the level of intervention, and the level of intervention may depend on the how robust and global the denial is. So when you have to do an intervention with someone to get them to see that their addiction has affected them. I mean, I've had, I can remember a man who was in my office who had absolute knowledge of his own organic brain syndrome. And he knew that he had organic brain syndrome. He wasn't that far gone. And his wife and his daughter were just desperate for him to come to grips with his alcoholism. And, to him, he was just oblivious and just going to continue drinking. And to break through that denial, I don't know if he would even call it denial, because he was in touch with the fact that he had organic brain syndrome and still, could delude himself in some way into saying that this was going to be his existence. But then if you have to work with somebody or confront them or find techniques, my mentality is to still find experiential techniques that will help this person to get in touch with their denial.
Right.
So,
I guess what I'm saying is, it seems to me that in terms of the stage, the question was about the stage of therapy.
yeah.
It seems to me that it's clear that this applies to the stage of therapy where someone who's addicted to nicotine wants to stop smoking.
No, I'm not with you there quite, because the essence of this is be experiential.
Okay.
So the essence is that whatever level the person is, be experiential at that level. And so, you can sculpt denial, I suspect, but I would have I have puzzles and games and other little things that create and bring the experience to life.
And sometimes we are paradoxical.
Sometimes I'm
paradoxical. So if a
paradoxical.
person comes and say, my wife thinks I'm a drunk and I need to change, I need to do something, I don't think. And what we would do, and what I saw Jeff doing many times, is that, why is that? Why do you want to do that? It's not fun. It's not, bringing you any problem. Why do I do that? So we confront that, and he would say, oh, my wife is not happy about it. So show me how it is. So we would, exactly how Jeff said, we would be experiential in a level that they are. So he would just make a sculpture. How is his relationship with his wife? So you're telling me that your relationship, that this thing that they're not so bad for you is just affecting your relationship in this way. And then the person would say, oh yeah, and my wife said that if I don't get help, by the way, she will divorce me. So you will access and, get a grip of the problem whatever it is. And sometimes we use some either confrontation or paradoxical techniques.
This experience of breaking through, as Jeff described, as you're talking about, that I think is sort of like what is the most nettlesome thing about addiction treatment.
You can't really see this so well from the back of the room, but this is like a sheet that I have in my room. It would be one thing that I might use. If you look inside the triangle, you can see it, right? What does it say inside the triangle? It does not say Paris in the Spring inside the triangle. Right. Right. Right? So it says Paris in the spring. But what you saw was Paris in the Spring. And then when you heard it, you went, uh-huh. And if you look inside the rectangle, how many times does the letter F, as in Frank, appear inside the rectangle? Now, most people, when they look at that and they see it, they're going to say 3. But actually, the letter F appears in the rectangle 6 times, except that people don't necessarily see it. So if I want to get across the fact that you're overlooking the obvious, I might take out this simple sheet, I show it to the person, and I get given an experience, you're overlooking the obvious. Herman?
Well, going back to originally, most addicts, we're not going to deal with psychotherapeutically the physiological component of the addiction.
Right.
If there is such a thing. That was a bit of an
Yeah,
argument.
there is.
Nevertheless, the psychological, there are issues. There's always psychological issues while they're addicted. Even if they're in denial of all of that, if you build up their resources, you will help undermine the psychological issues maintaining the addiction. Therefore, all of the previous that you've been doing still pertains. You still don't have to go to a negative, this is what you're losing, this is what's wrong. You still build up all the positives, and it should theoretically undermine everything. Notice the should qualitatively.
Yeah. I am, because again, in my conceptualization, I try to be a little bit like Erickson. Like if Erickson would have thought Jeff is a smoker, then he would have had a tote, and he would have had to manipulate that tote. But if he could divide it down into components, then he would have a way of intervening. So whatever the problem is, if I can say this is not an addiction, now, if the patient is mandated, if the patient is not mandated, if the patient is completely in denial or not in denial, it's not going to affect that essential orientation, which is divide and conquer. Find ways of getting in and giving the person an experience that will change their orientation spontaneously, that they will generate the impetus. Oh my God, I've been overlooking the obvious. Right? So I can't even tell you how many little toys and puzzles and games and sheets that I have in my room.
I'm thinking about it, and I completely agree with you in terms of what I'm trying to do is orchestrate an epiphany. That's what I'm trying to have happen with somebody.
Well, I'm getting there. You're getting me into that epiphany.
You know what I mean? For them to have an epiphany.
Oh yeah, right.
And one of the things I've learned about that is
Uh-huh.
that my trying to help them undermines the likelihood of
Right.
them having an epiphany.
That's right.
You see what I'm saying? It's like
Yeah.
they're fighting a battle. I should let them fight their battle and not have it be with me, the psychotherapeutic institution that I am. You know, it's like I get migraine headaches. I can eat chocolate all I want. I'll also be puking at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
I can eat as much chocolate as I want.
It's a choice.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But I have to surrender to something if I'm going to live sane. The epiphany for me is at 3 in the morning, I'm praying to the porcelain god.
Right.
And nobody has stopped me from having that experience. And I think a lot of psychotherapy inadvertently stops people from having that throwing up in the middle of the night experience.
Yeah.
Because we're so busy trying to help.
Well, I don't disagree with the philosophy at all. So we're preaching to the choir on this one. We need to create situations whereby people will have their own realizations. We have a brief amount of time left, and I thought that one other thing that I could do is to give you this model interview, like how I might work with smoking, and that's a little bit didactic. There are 5 parts to what I would traditionally use for a smoking problem. 3 that happen in the session, 1 pre-session and 1 post-session. So when somebody calls me for stopping smoking, I tell them that there are these 5 parts. I also explain to them that I will do my best to do the session in 1 hour, and that we will just take 1 hour. I reserve the right to have 2 follow-up sessions. It could be half hour each. And I charge accordingly, but basically I just hope, and in most cases, 1 session, in the majority of cases, 1 session is usually what I do with smoking. But I have these 5 stages, each of one that is equally important. So there may be time that I take in the pre-session call, maybe 10 minutes, and then in the session there would be the assessment, which would be strategic. There would be strategies and tasks that I give to a person. There would be hypnosis. I'd never promised that, but more often than not I use hypnosis. And then there would be the post-session follow-up, each, again, equally important. So in the pre-session call, I ask if there are other family members, because I find that if I have more than 1 person in the room, the therapy can be more effective. The more people you have, the easier the therapy becomes, at least to me. I ask them to commit themselves to do the tasks that I will ask them to do after the session. And I tell them to come to the session uncomfortable. I want you to come to this session uncomfortable. And I need to know something about your discomfort and your urge. So please come to the session uncomfortable. Have your last cigarette before you go to sleep. Get rid of all of your smoking material and clean out all of the ashtrays in the car. Come into the session uncomfortable. And the essence of that is strategic. I don't want them to think that the hypnosis is going to make them stop smoking. Once they've stopped smoking, they're coming to me, and then my therapy is oriented to how to keep them not smoking and how to maintain them as a non-smoker. Then I tell them that there may be a pre-session task. Could be behavioral. Switch to your second favorite brand. Enjoy smoking. You know, you've had the experience of moving from one place to a new location because it's time to have a change of life, but you want to have some time to say thank you and to say goodbye to the situation that you have been in. I'd like you to enjoy smoking, get the maximum amount of pleasure you can out of every cigarette. Anything that I can do that will insert therapy into the session before the session even starts, I consider to be a good intervention. The therapy starts with the first call. It doesn't start when the person comes into the office. And then I use email. And I have emailed people this why do you know? So maybe I can't see somebody for a few weeks. I say, okay, I'm going to email you a question. I email them, you know, why do you know that you can be a non-smoker? Only answer this in the affirmative. Give me 10 reasons. And so they start. And then they send that back to me, and then I go to level 2. And then they send that back to me. And then I go to level 3. So I have people already doing the work when they immediately call. Then there's this series of assessment questions. And these are 22 assessment questions, but they come in categories. So some of the suggestions are meant to soften the problem and corner the person. Cornering would be a technique whereby if you're in a corner, you need to step forward. So try to put this person in a corner where they have to make a step forward. Some of the questions would be done for motivation, to access the motivation, some questions for pattern disruption, some questions to understand who this person is in the world, what they value, some scaling questions, some questions that have to do with strategies that work, some questions that are resource retrieval, helping the person to establish reference experiences for accomplishing the goal, and questions that can help me to understand the systemic function, which could be familial or cultural. So those are the categories that I tend to think in, and then these are the more of the specifics. So saying to the person, how long have you smoked? And putting it into the immediate past. So not how long, or not what kind of cigarettes are you smoking? What kind of cigarettes have you smoked? How much have you been smoking? Right? So then this is that making small steps, moving the problem into the immediate past. Is that necessarily a systemically significant intervention? I don't know, probably not, but much more artistic and elegant to circumscribe the problem into the immediate past. And asking people why stop smoking is almost, they already have a pre-programmed answer to that, usually by the time that they come in. Finding out whether they did the pre-session task, and then especially what have you enjoyed, not what have you been enjoyed, what have you enjoyed about smoking? Because then I can see if there's something that I can do to create the same kind of enjoyment. What have you enjoyed about the mechanical act of smoking? And then finding out how the person has overcome other habits. Sometimes the problem is just an example of a larger set. I don't know how to do that without having a...
Yeah. So, for instance, addiction can be one of the symptoms of a borderline personality. So, there is a bigger system, and any addiction can be part of a
larger
symptom.
problem can be not taking care of yourself.
Or that.
And so what the person brings in is their cigarette smoking, but really that's not the problem. The problem is that they're not taking care of themselves.
Yeah,
they are focused on the cigarette smoking, but it's really just one subset of a larger superset. What Erickson did with me is to look at the subset and to divide the problem into the component parts. So if you could imagine an axis, put the problem on the center of an XY axis. Think, is this problem part of a larger set? Think, can this problem be divided into subsets? Think, if you have this problem now, what are the antecedents that led to it? Think, if you have this problem now, where can it lead you? So past, future, superset, subset. So for example, a patient came in and she was falling. And this was a psychological problem. There was nothing neurological about it. She was just falling. And so she had been a patient of Erickson's. Well, what brought you to see Erickson? She was 18 and she was falling. And she had just been recently married. And I understood something about the social situation. This is a very artistic woman who was living under the thumb of a very domineering and controlling engineer-type husband. And symbolically, she couldn't stand up under the weight of living with this domineering husband, but neither Erickson or I made that interpretation. So when she was 18 and she came in with the husband, Erickson said to them, have you considered divorcing? You don't seem to belong together. I would never make that kind of incisive intervention, but Erickson seemed to feel comfortable with making that kind of intervention. And they said no, that they were going to stay married for religious reasons. Erickson said, well, you're going to stay married for religious reasons. Have you considered having a family? They did some family planning. She got over falling. She became pregnant, and after 6 months of therapy with Erickson, intermittently, she was okay. At the end of 6 months, Erickson said to her, "You don't need any more therapy now." He said, "Sometime when you're in your 40s, you may need more therapy." She got into her 40s, Erickson had died. She called Mrs. Erickson, she was referred to me, and I came and saw her. Why could Erickson extrapolate into the future what happened when she was in her 40s? Children left home, and she could no longer stand up under the weight of that domineering husband. So if you put the problem on an axis and you extrapolate the antecedents and you anticipate the consequences, what's going to happen if you have a borderline personality disorder when, for example, there's the children leave home or there's some kind of an abandonment issue. So that question of understanding the superset and the subset turns out to be helpful. Show me how you've smoked. Pantomime smoking. So this is like another subset of sculpting. Show me how you drink. Pantomime drinking. This also came from Erickson. There was a case of a young man when I was just initially in practice. This young man, who was a friend of the Erickson family, came to Erickson for stopping smoking. So this was, in the early mid-1970s, different cultural zeitgeist. And the young man was a teacher, and he was gay. And at that time, being identified as gay was not the way to succeed in teaching. So Erickson asked him to pantomime smoking, and then told him that the way that he smoked gave away his sexual orientation. And then Erickson gave him some tasks to do to stop smoking. The man immediately stopped smoking. But then he went back to smoking. And then Erickson wasn't seeing patients, so Erickson referred him to me. And this is one of the first referrals that I got. And so Erickson is looking over my shoulder, watching and learning something about who I am as a psychotherapist, because I know that his family is reporting back to him what I'm doing in psychotherapy. So I asked the man, why did he go back to smoking? And he said, well, Erickson made it so easy to stop smoking that he thought he could just start and stop again. So I knew that I had to make it difficult. So I saw him, I gave him a therapy, I did hypnosis with him, and I said to him that if the therapy was successful, he would not have to see me again. If the therapy was not successful, he could not see me again until he smoked publicly for 2 weeks. So he came back and the therapy wasn't successful. The session lasted 5 minutes. I dismissed him. I told him, come back after you've smoked publicly for 2 weeks. Well, Erickson had already contaminated that idea that if he smoked publicly, he would be giving away his sexual orientation, and he smoked publicly for 2 weeks. Came back, we did another hypnosis, and he quit smoking and then never went back to it. So I had to make it into a little bit of an ordeal. But it came out of what Erickson had asked him, which was to pantomime smoking. Again, become overly conscious. Finding out about scaling the part of you that wants to stop versus the part of you that doesn't, describing the urge to smoke as a way of trying to disrupt the pattern, and predicting what could be difficult. And then this idea, give me 5 intelligent excuses to smoke. Give me 5 intelligent excuses to have 1 drink of alcohol. Give me 5 excuses befitting your intelligence. So human beings are characterized by an incredible capacity to justify their own absurd actions. And if you don't believe that, just look at the situation in the Middle East right now, and we will understand immediately that this works systemically as well as individually. We all have incredible capacity to justify our own absurd action. So if you ventilate the excuses, you ventilate the justifications, they don't live so well in the light. And so when the person has to hear those justifications and excuses and they have to ventilate them, sometimes they can get in the way.
So do you talk about it when they say?
Say that again?
Do you talk about when they give you an excuse because it's an intelligent excuse, or use it because it's fun, or smoking makes me keep
Yeah.
skinny, or whatever?
Well, then, it's easy to do a little cognitive therapy and have the person just answer the excuses, and then they can, come up with their own intelligent ways of dealing with those excuses, or doing that in a gestalt fashion. So here's the part of you who makes the excuses, put another part on the opposite side, have that part answer the excuses. And so then come out into the middle, scale that. If you are 100% of your energy, how much of energy is in this chair? How much energy is in this chair? Okay, what would it take to move 5% of the energy from this chair over to this chair? All right, so immediately try to get the person to live the moment, try to get the person to live the experience. But again, that's a question that I could use in the first session, which is Tell me 5 intelligent excuses to have, one puff of one cigarette. Tell me 5 intelligent excuses. And it's interesting because it becomes hard for the person to do. And then it's a cornering. You don't want them to be able to use those excuses that they are using inside their own mind, because remember, in the name of God, mother, and country, every possible atrocity has been justified. You can read Dostoevsky and you can understand how to justify murder. You can look into history and understand how to justify oppression and how to justify all kinds of horrors. So human beings are just characterized by an incredible capacity to justify their own absurd behavior. And once we can ventilate those, perhaps people can move around them.
And one more question. You said that you give them pre-session tasks, like quit smoking the night before. What if they don't?
If they don't, then I almost assume that the therapy is going to be harder. And that if they don't follow the pre-session task, I assume that I may need to do more work on motivation, I may do more paradoxical work. The rule that I have in my head is that the amount of paradox is directly proportional to the perceived resistance. So the more resistance that I perceive, the more paradoxical I tend to become. And then in the post-session, I might say to the person, call me 5 minutes after you leave. Call me 1 hour after you leave. Call me 1 day after you leave. Email me. I keep track of the person. It's like the swing of tennis, the setup, the intervention, and the follow-through. And the follow-through tends to be just as important as the setup and the intervention. So,
Can I ask you what success rate you have with hypnosis?
success rate?
Yeah.
I don't keep good statistics, and I'm embarrassed to say that. I can only imagine, I would say that my success rate for helping people to stop smoking, it's got to be over 50% with just one session. You have to be able to measure the recidivism, and some people it's very easy to stop, but do they stay stopped? And the important thing is that they establish a new identity as being non-smokers. It's just on that smoking issue. I think that the success for weight control is not so high, but traditionally weight control is a very difficult problem for psychotherapy. Alcohol, it may be that a lot of my therapy is just getting the person into a 12-step program. I would consider myself successful with some people if I just get them into the 12-step program. All right, so please, who's got those sheets that you have with your email address. And if you didn't sign that sheet, yes, I will make sure that I email this to you. And so then you'll get all of this information, including the information that I just didn't have the time to cover. And I'm sorry for being a little rushed, but I'm glad that I was able to cover at least the outline of 3 aspects of this phenomenological approach. So thanks so much, and have a great conference. Thank you so much.